Hi everyone. I'll start with the microphone, but for reasons that will become obvious, I might have to drop off it. It's a pleasure to see you all here this evening. I am going to do something which, when I suggested to Josh, he said, we've never had anybody do that before at one of these events, which is going to lead to a conclusion which will either be that this is the start of a brand new way of doing things or that it's a lesson learned. And hopefully it's going to be the former. What I want to do is to show you in very real terms how you can produce something that's actually useful and actually real in AI. AI has so much buzz around it, and yet what I have found is that most people feel like they don't really know what's going on with AI. They feel like they're being left behind by it. They feel like they're a bit of a fraud because they're left behind by it. And literally everybody feels this way. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that unlike when mobile came around and you had to go out and learn Objective-C or whatever it was to build Apple apps, building really good prompts and starting to recognize the places in which you can use AI is something that is within the reach of most people. And I think that we're about to see a whole new set of applications come out, not as a result of massive technical ingenuity, but as a result of people like yourselves seeing problems that can be solved with this tool. It is a tool that is in everyone's hands right now. It's just that if what you have in your hand is a hammer and everything looks like a nail, nobody really knows what's in their hand at the moment. Like, is it a hairdryer? Is it a hammer? Is it a spoon? And because you don't know what's in your hand, it's very hard to see the opportunities that are there in AI. So what we're going to do today is build out an application. And we're going to build out an application that we're going to attempt to live test right from the get-go. So I've built an AI support agent, and the support agent is going to answer questions. I just needed to find some event that was on at the moment. So it's going to answer questions, not sponsored by Sifted, but it's going to answer questions about the Sifted Summit. So the Sifted Summit has a whole bunch of information, quite a lot of information, I would say slightly overwhelming information if you are going to attend. And what I've built is an AI agent that ingests all of that information and answers your questions for you. And we're going to kick off by demoing the agent straight away. I always get really annoyed by demos where they save the actual glitzy bits to the end because I never know whether it's worth paying attention along the way. So we'll see whether this works right from the gate, out of the gate. So this will probably process about 10 of your messages. So I would like to ask for some volunteers. You don't have to stick up your hand. All you have to do is what's very natural. Pull out a phone and open your email, please. If you've not already got your phone in your hand, don't worry about doing it. We've already got 10 people who are doing it. So the email address you need to go is our support agent, who is Sammy@intentional.io. And ask Sammy something. Before you ask her it, because I've done this exercise before and people ask some funny things, I'm going to show what you emailed on screen. So maybe pre-assess the question that you want to ask Sammy. But make it the type of question you might ask about the event. Think about something that you'd find interesting at the event, something that relates to you. Maybe it's you want to see talks on AI. Maybe it's that you want to see something relating to HR. I don't know what it is. But just take a second, those of you who have your phones in your hand, and please send Sammy an email. It's going to take a few minutes for that to process, because it's going to take a few minutes for the humans to do their job, and then it's going to take a few minutes for the AI to do its job. And in the meantime, I'm going to start showing you how Sammy is made. Can you guys hear me if I don't use the microphone? Can you hear me at the back if I don't use the microphone? So. I'm getting a thumbs up from behind you, Gemma. I don't quite know how to do this. I'm going to try and sit near to the microphone. Does this work? Okay, fine. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to craft the prompt. So we're going to start off, basically, I'm going to jump across to a place called Make, which is like Zapier, but less annoying to use. And so Make makes an automation platform a little bit like Zapier. I think it's nicer to use than Zapier. And what I've set up is an automation in Make, which is going to check Sammy's inbox. And wow, okay, a lot of you have emailed in. Okay, amazing. So it's checking Sammy's inbox, which is here. And it is then taking the email that you have sent, and it is injecting that email into a prompt that's being sent to OpenAI. And OpenAI is then taking a combination of all of the information from the sifted event and the question in the email, and it's generating the email in response to that. And then finally, that email is being pushed back into Gmail. Can I just see a rough, this is the way I like to do things. Thumbs up if you roughly got that. Thumbs across if you're like, meh, and thumbs down if you didn't. I really want to see those thumbs. Okay, all right. There's quite a good few thumbs up, thumbs middle. So does anybody want to ask a representative question on behalf of all of those who didn't? No pressure. Does anybody have a question they want to ask? Yes.
Is OpenAI, or did you paste in all the information? Did you scrape the sifted website, or is it actually an agent going out to the website?
Great question. Okay, I'm going to come to that now. So this, good question. Thank you for queuing me up. So let's see. What I'm going to see is hopefully some of you are getting responses. Robert Buxton wanted to know why there were no chairs or lights. The AI was very grateful for the inquiry about the Sifted Summit. Didn't really know what the answer was and suggested getting in touch with the organisers. Now, this is running on a version of the prompt that I've tuned. When I say I've tuned, I just got done very quickly. And this version of the prompt basically looks to answer, and roughly, if it's not very aggressively told that if it doesn't know the answer, to say it doesn't know the answer. So it might tend towards hallucinations, but it's given an answer. Let me see if there is a question more about content, because it's got all the content. Hasn't yet processed this one. It's going to process the first few questions. So it doesn't have, Josh, I'm afraid it's not going to give you anything about the contrast between. Right, great. Here's a good example. So is it worth going if I'm a very small startup? It said, in response, I would say it can be very beneficial to small startups like yours. We've got various sessions on finance, climate tech, and it goes through a bunch of the different sessions. I didn't use the most sophisticated prompt with this, but hopefully, I just think it's really interesting to see something real and something live that can actually help people. And once we go through the prompt, then hopefully you will see about how you can enrich the prompt and get it to do whatever you want it to do. All makes sense. Good, right. So we'll start off by doing the basic prompt on this, and then we'll build up. So I'm going to do this in sections. So I'm going to rebuild this automation so that you've got a feel for what's going on. And in Make, we're going to create a new scenario. We're going to connect to Gmail. I've already connected my Gmail account, so I'm going to tell it to watch emails on Sammy's account, which is pre-connected. I'm going to tell it to go to the inbox, and I'm not going to set anything else. There are a bunch of different settings in here. There's a lot of stuff that I'm going to skip over in the interest of the fact that it's impossible to go through all of it all, but hopefully it will make sense. So this first step in the scenario, and you can sign up, it's make.com. This just watches the inbox. And then the next step, I'm going to say, I want you to take what has come into the inbox, and then I'm going to write a prompt that I want you to send to OpenAI. Now, there's a bunch of actions that OpenAI expose through Make. You can create an image, so you can use DALL-E to create an image. You can create a translation, a transcription, so you can upload an audio file. Whoops, I hit that too soon. Let me delete that and we'll do that again. So what I want to do is create what OpenAI called a completion. Completion is everything in generative AI is essentially giving a block of text and you get text back in return, and that's referred to as a completion. And chat was one of the experiments that OpenAI did for how to most usefully deliver completions that people actually wanted to use. And so chat is generally, all of the OpenAI stuff is, if you go through the models, is referred to as completions, but we're essentially kind of using the same chat that you would use through ChatGPT. We can choose what model we want to use. I'm going to, just for safety, I'm going to use, I don't know why I've got access to it, but I've got access to the 32K GPT-4. And this is where we start to build it up. So essentially what I'm building here is a chat history in actual fact, because when you submit a chat to OpenAI, whether it's through ChatGPT or it's through the API, you don't just submit your last chat, you actually submit the whole of the history that can fit in. It gets sent to OpenAI, it figures out from the history what the next most appropriate response is, and then it sends it back to you. In this case, I only need to send one message, which is the prompt that I'm going to generate. Now I'm going to switch, because this is a tiny little box, it's not very easy to work in here. I'm going to switch across to a tool that OpenAI has called Playground. Can I see some hands if you've seen this tool before? Amazing, good, right, good selection of you. So Playground is essentially kind of a geared up direct access way to play with OpenAI's API. And you can craft prompts here and you can control a lot more things than you can do if you're going through ChatGPT. So I've pre-made this prompt, but I'm going to type out as much as possible because I think it's interesting and helpful to see it. So in this, we're building this just as we would a normal prompt. So I'm going to tell it, you are a support rep for the Sifted. And then I'm going to add something that says you will use if you don't know the answer to this question, answer I don't know. If you want to avoid hallucinations in using generative AI, it's really important to do two things. One, provide the information that you want the AI to use. And two, tell it what to do if it doesn't know. Like you really need to make it, you need to essentially kind of create a safe space for the AI to operate. So like if it doesn't think it's permissible to not know, it will not know. If you make it permissible to not know, it's absolutely fine doing it.
Sorry, you wrote to know the question.
If you do, thank you. If you do not know the answer to the question, I don't know. So I don't know. The next thing is when you're building prompts, you will often have large blocks of text that you need the prompt to refer to. It's important to do what developers would call delimiting that text. In plain English speak, that means make it really freaking clear where the text begins and ends. So for the Sifted conference, the text that I'm going to use is it's this much text. And I'm going to input that text in a format called Markdown, which many of you have actually inadvertently used in WhatsApp. If you use 2 asterisks on one side and 2 asterisks on the other, it turns it to bold. That's a tiny little bit of Markdown, but Markdown basically lets you use text to format text more effectively. Now, I've already lifted the whole of the Sifted schedule into Markdown, and it is all here. So I'm going to copy this and paste it into the paste it into the playground, and I'm going to make it very clear where it begins and ends. And I'm going to say delimited by, and I'm going to use backticks because developers like to use backticks to do stuff. And the reality is that the AI has learned a lot of stuff from things written by developers. So it's worth using some of these conventions because it's already familiar to it. Now I've just pasted in the whole of the schedule. Okay, so it's all in there. This is where it begins. And I'm going to copy that and put it at the end. So now I'm going to tell it, so we've told it that it's a support rep for the conference. You're going to be as helpful as possible. You'll use all of the information below to answer the questions. If you don't know the answer to the question, say, I don't know, here's the schedule. Now what we need to do is say what question the user has submitted. So here is an email. Now I'm going to hard code this email in, but in a minute we're going to lift it across into make, and we're going to use the variables that make gives us from the email that was submitted to change these into dynamic content in here. But for the purposes of building the prompt and also for the purposes of understanding really how accessible this stuff is, even if you're not into variables and make and anything else, I'm just going to hard code them in. So let's say email subject. I'm being a bit sloppy with my formatting here. I would be a bit more careful, more clean with this normally, but I'm just going to be quick. So I've just said, I'd love to know what's on for beginners around AI. Can you tell me especially things on the afternoon? Let's see if I can make this a bit bigger because I imagine it's not super visible right at the back. I'd just like to point out I'm not normally so narcissistic to have my own photo on my own thing. But I don't have anywhere to push any of you to other than my LinkedIn profile. So that's why it's there. It's not normally my desktop. So email subject, email body, from address. I'm going to use my from address. Actually, it doesn't matter, but I will put in a date. So I'm going to put in the date because you can imagine if you're answering questions about this and it's getting very close to the conference, you might be answering questions differently than if it's not. And you're certainly going to be answering questions differently if the conference has already passed than if it hasn't. So give it all the context that it needs. So this is the email. Now I'm going to tell it to write a response to this user. Now I'm going to make this pretty brief just now, but I'm going to show you some techniques of getting much, much better performance from it. They're going to take too long to write out, but I will write them out. You have to be very firm with the AI. Like, it will tend to drift off. It is worth reiterating things and being super clear. So I will tell it again. And if you don't know, fine. So now we have, hopefully, unless I've forgotten something, it's quite difficult comparing this and doing prompting at the same time, but hopefully we've got a whole prompt that will produce an email in response to this. So let's submit it and see what comes out. In real life, if you actually do start productionizing AI, you have to use, in general, when you build software, you build tests. So the more complex your software is, the more tests you add to ensure that your software is working correctly. AI is a different beast because in a normal test, you would say, given this user with this name, we would expect exactly this email to be printed out. But AI is non-deterministic, so you won't necessarily get the email printed out. So to make sure, if you are productionizing something, to make sure that it works the way you expect it to, you use, and I've only been reading up on this recently, so I'm certain there are people in the audience who are going to be more knowledgeable who can correct me, but you use things called evals, And essentially the eval is another layer of AI that says, given the answer should contain this, should contain that, should not contain this. And so the answer tells you whether or not, as you evolve your prompt and as you get new examples in, that it's doing what you expect it to do. So this has given me an answer to this. We don't have time for me to go through and kind of check the quality of it, but it's essentially giving me an email and response. I would change this so that it says, answer in a friendly tone, aim to keep the email below 150 words unless absolutely necessary. Address it to the person by name and sign off best wishes, Sammy. And let's put in my name. So if I submit it, again, we're going to probably see an improvement in tone. Hopefully we're going to see it a little bit shorter. A lot of people have, a question I see people ask a lot is, how do you get tone of voice? How do you get the thing to write stuff in the way that you want stuff written? I've done quite a lot of experimentation on this in the past, and the best advice I can give is that you want to do a combination of rules and examples. So you always have to think of this thing, because this is the nature of this thing. Every interaction with it is a completely fresh interaction. So it has no context. It's not an employee that's been working for you for a while and has learned what works for you and what doesn't work for you and how you like to talk about stuff. It's literally, this is exercise 1, day 1, every single time you interact with it. And it needs every single bit of information that it has to have in order to make that exercise work. So in getting tone of voice, it's good to use examples. So put in literally blocks that will show an example email. And I actually like to show the examples, the mapping between the raw content and the tone of voice. So saying, given this information that we want to communicate to the user, this is the email that we produce to them. Give a few examples. And then sometimes you can further enrich that by then giving it some rules as well. So saying something like, it shouldn't be longer than this amount, or these are some brand words that we use. Or if you use, like, I did some experiments in producing content for websites, and you could say to it, like, if you are connecting this to a sport, make sure you connect it to baseball, because that's what we sponsor. For some reason, this has given up the ghost on resubmitting it, so great. Okay, fine, so we're back. Okay, fine. So we're a little friendly already, and it's chatter. It's saying "Dear Peter" in person, and I could sculpt the whole of the tone of that if I told it, like, if for instance you want it to write blog posts for you, and you want your blog posts to be written in a format where they open with a story and then they move on to relating the story to the product, and then they move on to a pithy conclusion. Put all of that information in the prompt. Don't just tell it to write a blog post and be disappointed that the blog post doesn't look the specific way that you have it in your mind. The more that you put this on Rails, the more that it will perform on Rails. So I'm going to take this across, and I'm just going to show you how, if I put this in here, I'm going to just literally copied and pasted this. I copied and pasted the output rather than the input. So I'm going to copy and paste the input into the prompt here. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to change these variables, or I'm going to change those hard-coded values for the variables that have come from the email that we have in. So let's stick those in. Fine. So now we've got the schedule, we've got the initial prompt, and I've put the variables in for the email. Now, hopefully, if this, I'm going to add one more, I'm actually going to add one more thing to the prompt, because now what I want it to do is not just output the email as plain text. I want it to output the email as HTML, and don't use any body tags, backticks, just put it out directly, e.g. So hopefully, and keep testing your prompt in the playground, or in fact, don't go to ChatGPT, keep testing your prompt in the playground, because you can resculpt the prompt. In ChatGPT, you're going to end up copying and pasting your prompt, and what you're actually going to be submitting to the model is the concatenation of all of the prompts that you've been trying with. So you want to work directly with it. I'm just going to assume that for the sake of speed that works. And I'm going to paste this in here. Unfortunately, I didn't paste in the variables, so let's put those in as well. Email subject. I actually don't know, to be honest. There's two things I could do now. One, I could persist with this, which will be fiddly, but it's probably going to get to what you expect. But this is going to put some variables in. Two, I can show you some more powerful techniques for getting better output from the prompts. Could I have a show of hands for one? And for more powerful techniques? Great, good, that's more interesting to me. So one of the techniques that I want to show you is that if any of you played with, the longer you play with ChatGPT and the more you try to get it to do, the more you realize it's capable, but it's kind of like fast and lazy. It's like enthusiastic ADHD junior developer. Like it's always there, always on, always ready, always on it, but it missed 5 of the things that you said to it at the start. And everything that you do in how you instruct it has to take account for that. So there's a couple of techniques that are good for getting better performance out of it. And I'm going to show you how I've done this. Let's make this a bit cleaner. I'm sorry that this is in black and white. It's not so. In fact, let's see if I can paste this into the Google Doc. It'll probably be a bit more readable in here. So these prompts get pretty significantly long after a point. So I've opened by saying it's extremely careful customer service rep. I've also told it that it's high intelligence and extremely thorough. One of the things that this pre-prompt does, which OpenAI exposes more powerfully in what's called the system prompt, which you can go and read about, is it literally changes the perspective of how the AI answers your question. Now, to get an idea of what that means, imagine if I asked you, in your capacity as an employee, or as a sibling, or as a mother, or as a software developer, how would you answer the question of how AI is impacting you? Now, in several of those questions, you'd be like, look, as a sibling, I literally don't even know how to answer this question. But it shifts your perspective. Like, we do this to people all the time. We say, given your perspective as, how do you answer X? Do the same thing to the AI. It changes the nature of the answer it gives. So if you tell it it's high intelligence, it's going to give you more intelligence. If you tell it it's a sarcastic Redditor, you're going to get a completely different response from it. So in this prompt, I've now given it the email at the start. I'm going to try and make this a little bit smaller because it feels a bit drastic. I introduced the task. Writing prompts is, I think, a very similar skill to writing good questions on Stack Overflow. For those of you who haven't written questions on Stack Overflow, the essence of writing a good question on Stack Overflow is strip everything out of the question that doesn't relate to the problem that you want that person to solve. Like, you want to whittle it down. This is a good question in life. Like, answering a good question in life is removing all of the other cruft from the question except the actual problem that you want the question to solve. So as you prompt stuff, you want to remove all of the cruft from the prompt that what you want them to solve, and you want to kind of reiterate to the person what they should be doing. So anyway, this has a statement of the problem at the start. Then it's got, this is the paste of all of the details about the conference. And then, and I'll finish it up here fairly quickly. Here's the thing that I'm going to teach you that I think is quite useful. At the point where the AI is outputting text, so when you go to ChatGPT, you don't just get a block of text returned to you, you get a stream of text returned to you. At the point where it's generating text, there is absolutely no difference to the AI between the text that it's generated and the original prompt that you gave it, which means that you can essentially extend the prompt by giving it a prompt that gets it to build more content. This is what I mean by this. I'm going to take this prompt, and assuming that this actually works, I'm going to paste it in here, and hopefully we will get a taste of it. So I've changed the nature of so I've changed the nature of this prompt to work in several steps. Now again, think about how you would instruct somebody who was like a junior employee. You break the task down. So in this prompt, what I've actually done is broken it down in several steps. And I said in step 1, read the email, rephrase the questions in the email to be as clear as possible. And if they use any synonyms, like somebody just says, what stuff's on for AI, reword it to match the type of terminology that you use. So say workshops or sessions instead, and print that out. Then in step 2, consider what the types of information, the class of information that the user might want is, and print that out. So in reflection to their email, they might be like, oh, they'd want to know stuff about AI, they'd want to know stuff about like stuff that's in this block. They're like literally expanding everything out. Then I say in step 3, go through and explicitly pull out every single line of information that relates to their request and just print it out. And then finally, I tell it to write the email and print that out. And then in the final part of the prompt, I tell it to look back at the email, check that everything's correct, and only then to print out the final version of the email, assuming that all of it is right. So it's almost done all of that, and I'm just going to scan back through it, and hopefully this will give you a taste for kind of how doing this sort of stuff can help improve the output of things. So for the sake of it, I'm just going to cancel this, but that prompt instructed it to, first of all, it printed out the user's email, then secondly, it printed out a summary of their question. Stephen's responding, requesting information on sessions involving AI. Then it said it gave itself instructions. We must identify which sessions involve fintech or AI. Then finally, it pulled out the content that relates to that email, just in raw terms. And then only after that does it attempt to actually build the email. And then in the very final step, it looks back over what it's created and checks that it's all correct. The fact that during that process, all of this content is essentially a prompt to it. So you're making its life easier by breaking it down to a series of steps. So the reason I wanted to share this in so much detail is that I hear a lot of talk about OpenAI hallucinating, not being much useful for stuff. It's extremely useful. And it's very accessible as well. It's just worth giving yourself time to figure out how it works, to experiment with it, to try it, to see what gets results, what doesn't get results, how to layer checks on top of it, and how to break the problem down to give it as much time to think as possible. Like more time to think, more words literally equals more computational power. Das ist alles.